An ocean of ice, endless, white, silent. The wind doesn't whisper here, it howls like a beast guarding the edge of the earth. And in this frozen wasteland, one man stood where no human had ever stood before, the top of the world, the North Pole. But here's the twist. The first man to plant his feet there wasn't the man history books told you about. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't crowned with medals. He wasn't even white. His name was Matthew Henson, a black explorer, born in a country that barely saw him as a man. And yet he conquered the impossible. But instead of glory, his triumph was stolen, his story buried, his face erased from the photographs. How could this happen? Why would the world forget the man who may have reached the North Pole before anyone else? The answer lies not in the ice, but in America itself, an America that refused to see him. And to understand Matthew Henson's journey, we have to go back to a time when the world he lived in made his victory unthinkable. America in the late 1800s. The Civil War is over. Slavery has ended. But freedom? Freedom was an illusion. Laws were written to divide. Schools, neighborhoods, even water fountains separated by color. For Black Americans, doors weren't just closed, they were locked, bolted, and guarded. Dreams were crushed before they could even begin. Now imagine growing up in that world, a world where you were told every single day you don't belong. And yet, far from the cities and their hatred, another obsession was rising: Arctic exploration. The frozen North. It wasn't just a place, it was a prize. Nations raced to be the first to reach the top of the world. It meant power, prestige, glory for empire. Men risked their lives, chasing it through blizzards and darkness. Many never returned. And into this fever stepped Robert Peary, an ambitious U.S. naval officer. Brilliant, ruthless, obsessed. He wanted one thing above all else: to plant the American flag on the North Pole, and to be remembered as the man who conquered it. But Peary would not go alone. He needed someone beside him, someone stronger, faster, more resilient than the men of his era. That man would be Matthew Henson, a black man in a country that denied him a seat at the table, yet destined to become the very backbone of Peary's quest. How did a man America tried to erase end up leading one of the most daring expeditions in history? The answer begins not with ice and glory, but with tragedy. The story of a boy who lost everything and still found his way to the top of the world. Imagine being born free, but never truly free. Matthew Henson entered the world in 1866, the son of black sharecroppers in Maryland. The Civil War had ended only a year before. Freedom was supposed to be his birthright, but the shadows of slavery still stretched long across the land. Then, tragedy. His parents were gone before he was a teenager. Orphaned, alone, no home, no future. In a country that told him he had no place, no worth, no tomorrow. So he ran. At just 12 years old, he fled to the sea, a runaway boy stepping onto the deck of a ship with nothing but hope in his heart. And there, fate gave him a teacher, Captain Childs, A man hardened by oceans, yet kind enough to see potential in a black child everyone else ignored. He taught Henson navigation, sailing, survival, the art of reading the stars when the world around you is nothing but endless water. For the first time, Matthew Henson felt freedom, salt air in his lungs, the horizon stretching wider than any wall America could build around him. At night, he would stand on the deck, staring into the darkness, dreaming not of land, but of the unknown. But the sea can't protect you forever. When Captain Childs died, Henson lost his protector. Once again, he was just a black man in a world waiting to chain him. Still, he carried those lessons. The ocean had forged him into more than a survivor. It had made him an explorer in spirit. Years later, destiny struck again. A chance encounter with an ambitious U.S. naval officer, Robert Peary. Peary needed a servant, someone to carry bags, someone to follow orders. What he got was far more dangerous, because what Peary saw in Matthew Henson would change both their fates forever. An endless wasteland of ice. No trees, no landmarks, only white and death waiting beneath it. This was the Arctic. And here, Matthew Henson became more than an explorer. He became indispensable. He built the sledges with his own hands. He trained the dogs, commanding them with precision. He mastered the biting wind, the cracking ice, the deadly silence. He learned the language of the Inuit, not as a trick, but as respect. They trusted him. They followed him. To them, he was a leader. But while Henson grew closer to the people of the Arctic, Robert Peary grew closer to only one thing: glory. For him, the pole was not a discovery, it was a crown, a chance to etch his name into eternity. And he would sacrifice anything and anyone to get it. The journey was merciless. Frostbite gnawed at fingers and toes. Hunger hollowed out the men. Nights dragged on in eternal darkness, where every sound of cracking ice could mean death. There were moments they thought they wouldn't survive. Moments Henson carried them forward, literally, while Peary, crippled by pain, watched from his sled. The Inuit later whispered the truth. It was Henson, not Peary, who led us to the pole. It was Henson who guided the team through storms. Henson who knew the dogs, the ice, the land. But here is the burning question. When the moment of triumph came, who was truly the first man to stand on top of the world? April 6, 1909. The date the world would never forget. But only one man knew the truth of that frozen night. And that man was Matthew Henson. The World's Edge. April 1909. The ice is breaking beneath their feet. The air burns the lungs like fire. Every step feels like walking on knives. The pole is close, closer than any man has ever reached. But Robert Peary can no longer walk. His feet are mangled, rotting from frostbite. He lies bundled in a sled, dragged forward by the strength of others. And so the lead falls to Matthew Henson, a black man in an age that denied him humanity. He surges forward with the Inuit team, dogs barking, sledges slicing the ice, the wind whipping like a chorus of ghosts. Then, silence. The compass confirms it. The calculations are done. They are here. The top of the Earth, the North Pole. Henson writes later, "I was in the lead. I think I was the first man to sit on top of the world." Imagine that moment. A man born into poverty, orphaned, cast aside by his own country, and yet he planted the flag at the very end of the earth. But history is cruel, because when they returned home, the headline screamed only one name: Robert Peary, the conqueror of the North Pole, the hero of the Arctic. Matthew Henson vanished, erased from the story he himself had carried. Photographs cropped him out. Newspapers ignored his name. The color of his skin made him invisible. He had stood at the very top of the world, yet in America he was forced back into the shadows. And there he would remain, for years, decades, a ghost haunting history books. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even through the ice. And one day, the world would begin to ask, who really stood there first? Imagine returning from the edge of the world, only to be told you don't exist. That was Matthew Henson's fate. While Robert Peary basked in parades, medals, and endless praise, Henson was given a desk, a quiet job as a lowly government clerk in New York. The man who had conquered the Arctic, reduced to filing papers in silence. No crowds, no applause, no honor. Years passed. His story faded. History forgot. But the people who had walked beside him did not. The Inuits spoke of him with reverence. Other explorers whispered the truth. Without Henson, there would have been no pole. And slowly, the world began to listen. In 1944, decades after that frozen triumph, President Truman awarded Henson the Congressional Medal. Too late to give him back the glory he had been denied, but not too late to whisper his name into history again. Then, in 1988, long after Henson had passed, another honor arrived. His body was reburied at Arlington National Cemetery, placed side by side with Robert Peary, the servant buried with the master, but this time as an equal. And yet the question lingers. Why did it take nearly a century to recognize the man who may have been the first to stand on top of the world? What does it say about the stories we choose to remember and the ones we choose to erase? Because maybe the history of exploration itself is incomplete. The ice, endless, white, silent. The same winds that once froze Matthew Henson still howl across the North Pole today. But now his story echoes there too. Matthew Henson proved something the world didn't want to believe: that courage knows no color, that greatness is not bound by skin, that a man America tried to erase could stand taller than all its prejudice. And yet his name almost vanished. Almost. Because history isn't just about who planted a flag. It's about who we choose to remember and who we dare to forget. So here's the truth. The greatest frontiers aren't just the icy edges of the map. They're human. They're the walls of injustice we break, the lies we refuse to keep telling. If you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard, share this story. Tell it again. Pass it on. Because the past only lives if we keep it alive.